So I'm Tim Barraclough, I'm tutor in biology and I'm the garden master at Magdalen College.
And I'm Dinah Rose, I'm the president of Magdalen, and we're going to go for a walk round Addisons in the height of springtime. So Tim, why Addisons Walks? Who is Addison?
So Joseph Addison was a fellow of the college from 1689 to 1711, and he took a particular interest in nature and sort of the connection between nature and gardening. A couple of hundred years later, I suppose, in his honour, what was known as the walks around the area here became known as Addisons Walk, to sort of commemorate his contribution.
And what is the walk? What are we talking about? How long is it? Where does it go?
So the walk starts from the bridge here and goes in a perimeter around the water meadow. And so there's this area, it's kind of island within, between tributaries of the Cherwell that floods each year. And the walk goes around, raised up from the level of the flood. So even when it's flooding, you can walk around.
I've walked this path in the middle of winter, and it's like a causeway completely surrounded by water on all sides.
Yes, yes.
But we're going to walk it today, and we'll be in a bower of endless flowers. We'll hopefully see some of the wildlife that lives around the walks. What kinds of birds and animals might we see today?
Varies from day to day, I suppose. We mentioned when the water is flooded, then you get huge flocks of gulls and water birds that come and hang around there. An unusual duck that you get around here sometimes is goosander. I'm not sure we'll see one today. A really special thing that we see around college as well, associated with the waterways, is the otter. So there's otters living. A student filmed one of them just a month or two ago from the student residences over at the other side of Addisons Walk. And in terms of the plants, the special thing we're going to see today is the snake's head fritillary, which is one of the really characteristic features of the water meadow at Magdalen.
The water meadows are particularly famous, as you've said, for the snake's head fritillaries, which are these wonderful purple plants we'll see in a minute, with mottled flowers that do look like snake's heads. But is it right that we've got another kind of fritillary that we can see from here?
There's the pineapple fritillary, also known as the crown imperial. So this is one of the first plants that grows up in our formal borders. But we'll see there's some differences with how it grows here to the snake's head fritillary.
So we're going to take a walk now around Addisons, and joining us will be the Magdalen College dog, Scrumpy. Here he is. In the Magdalen, thank you very much, Madeline. Scrumpy wearing the Magdalen colours, as you can see, and quite keen to get some exercise. So shall we go?
Let's go.
So here we are back on another bridge at the beautiful Holywell Ford, where many of our graduate students live. And we're standing at the gateway to the Magdalen Deer Park, the Grove.
Yes.
So tell us about the deer herd. How long have they been here?
So the deer have been here at least since the mid-1700s. So initially they lived the whole of the year in the grove there. Each year they move into the water meadow in the summer. The breeding season is over there, so there's the rut in autumn, and then shortly after that they move back into the grove again for the winter.
So I was here during the rut in the autumn, and it's quite an amazing sight. You get the head buck standing, roaring, with all of the does sort of wishing he'd go away, and the other bucks sort of miserably hanging around, feeling a bit excluded.
Yes, I mean, so with their fallow deer and the breeding system, it can vary a little bit. So you have the males are trying to monopolize as many females as they can. Depending on the quality of available males, you could have multiple harems, for example. But I think in our herd at the moment, there's one stag that's just very dominant, and so he's controlling the whole of the herd. He's
obviously bigger than the others.
Yes.
And it's a bit sad because we've got one beautiful white buck who seems to be rather outclassed.
Yes, I think he was brought in originally to try and kind of mix up the gene pool a bit, because there's some variation in coat colour. But he's not really proven able to do that, unfortunately.
But I think deer are not the only animals that have lived in the deer park, is that right?
Well, in the past there was a period of quite exotic animals. So in Victorian times there was a trend for country houses having more exotic animals. They had ostriches and emus and things. I don't think they lasted very long. And at the moment we have another family of animals living there in our badger set, is just visible through the gate here.
We saw some wonderful film a couple of weeks ago of two badgers from that set clearly grooming each other and looking like they might be wanting to start a family.
I think this is about the right time of year for that, so people need to keep their eyes peeled for movements around the set. So they occasionally cause problems for the formal gardens. It's quite hard to contain them within there.
But they like to dig the lawns up for worms.
They like digging, yes, but I think you know, it's a privilege for us to have them on campus, and it's great that they're there. We can put up with some minor disturbance. The grove's particularly well known for housing the deer herd over the winter, but in fact it's got a special status. It's a triple SI, so that's a site for special scientific interest. And that's not for the wildlife that's found there, it's actually for the geology.
Oh, right.
So the ground is a particular type of alluvial deposit that it's very rich in fossils from sort of hundreds of thousands of years ago, from between glacial periods. Mm-hmm. So there was a large mammoth bone that was found there, for example, and lots of other important remains. So there's been a recent change in the college as well in terms of welcoming animals onto the site.
That's right. And as we said, Scrumpy is now the official Magdalen College dog. But until recently, dogs were banned from Magdalen. In fact, the original statutes for the college, written by William Wainfleet, banned dogs, ferrets, songbirds and hawks. Because the idea was that the fellows would live a life of monastic seclusion, and they would not have sporting animals like hounds or hawks.
Like Scrumpy.
Like Scrumpy, yes. Scrumpy being, of course, a Cocker Spaniel. And they wouldn't have distracting pets either, also like Scrumpy, who's quite a distracting pet. But when I was elected president, I said, really, I couldn't come without the presidential animals, apart from, yes, I agree. As well as Scrumpy, we've got two cats, Spangle and Kiki, who live in the lodgings. But cats have always been allowed at Magdalen. Ah. In fact, Rouse, who was president for 62 years, had a dog which was known as the president's cat, because on that basis it was permissible for it to live in college.
Yeah. We've got the opposite view these days. Animals are actually beneficial for welfare rather than detracting from fellows' welfare.
That's right. In fact, Scrumpy is available to members of the JCR and MCR for walking. He has his own website where people can sign up to walk him. And I think this is also known as an inspirational location for some of the 20th century's most influential literature. Is that right?
I believe it is right. In fact, there's a plaque just over here that commemorates a poem by C.S. Lewis that was inspired by his regular walks around Addisons Walk.
C.S. Lewis, of course, a fellow of Magdalen for nearly 30 years and a great friend of J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a fellow of Merton. And they used to walk together around Addisons Walk. And apparently it's here that C.S. Lewis became converted to Christianity. And of course, C.S. Lewis, now known mainly for the Narnia books, but also a theologian and a writer of many works on Christianity. And there's a wonderful poem by C.S. Lewis here, recording his response to the spring on Addison's Walk. So we've got another wonderful view here of the college with the great tower and the new building, seen from across the water meadow. And between us and the college, there's an enormous quantity of fritillaries.
Yes, the water meadow, it's a special kind of habitat. There's a few other cases of similar areas around Oxford, Iffley Meadows and so on, but relatively rare and declining habitat that's seasonally flooded and that's been unimproved, so to speak. So no fertiliser, no pesticide for, well, we know for at least 500 years here.
So it's land that's grazed by animals, fertilised by animals, no fertiliser, no plough, and regularly flooded.
Yes, and a key part is cutting the hay as well, sort of late in the summer. And so by doing that, you're removing some of the nutrients as well. So yes, it's just fertilised by the flood and by the deer when they're on there in the summer as well.
And are fritillaries a native plant? How did they get here?
There's been a lot of debate about that. It wasn't clear for a long time. Many authors previously assumed that they were native because of their distribution, that they're found quite around these different areas around the Thames where there's flood meadows like this. But more recent investigation suggests that they're probably not. And the evidence for that is partly genetic. There's been a genetic study of the UK populations and shown that they sort of group within Northern European. So it's native to Europe, but it looks like it didn't make it across into the UK at that time. There's also evidence of people buying in bulbs from Holland in the kind of 1500s, 1600s, at the rise of when people were interested in ornamental gardens. So it's probably not native, but it's naturalised now. It's been growing in a natural state here for at least 200 years, probably more, 300 years. So it's a kind of escapee.
How do you think it got here?
There's various ideas about that. It could have escaped from the Botanic Garden, for example. So it's likely that they were planting fritillaries there. But it likes the conditions so well that it spread naturally now. And so potentially there didn't need to be that many initially, that it is capable of spreading there. So they were previously classified as vulnerable in the UK. That status has changed a bit now because of the thoughts about them not being strictly native. But in fact, they're found across Europe, and they're in decline there as well because this type of habitat has become more and more endangered as people improve it or plough it and so on. And so our population is still kind of important at a European level. Even if we no longer think that it's a truly native UK plant.
Obviously, we've got a lot of trees in the water meadow, and I can see that in some of them where the leaves are not yet out, there are big balls of mistletoe.
Yes, there's a very healthy mistletoe. So lime is a particularly favoured host tree for mistletoe, and we've got a few limes there. So I think most of the trees that you can see with mistletoe would be limes. This is actually one area that's been studied by one of my colleagues in the Department of Zoology, Rob Salguero Gomez, who's been using drones and other techniques to try and study the population structure of the mistletoe, so to understand the numbers of plants and also whether they might have an impact on their host tree. So they're typically thought not to have a great impact on the host tree, but you can see the numbers on some of those trees. It looks like a fairly heavy infestation. We have lost a couple of lime trees in the water meadow there, so this will be very interesting to see whether we can find any link there.
So what tree species have we got here at the moment, and have they changed over time?
Well, there's a wide variety of trees that are planted around the walk, and indeed one of the challenges is sort of managing the progress of those over time. I mean, they're long-lived plants, and at the moment one of the issues we've been facing is we've had a few horse chestnut trees planted, and horse chestnuts are facing problems with leaf miner and bleeding canker disease at the moment, and indeed there was quite a large one on the walk there that had to be felled this year. And so there's always you've always got to be planning ahead and thinking about how to do this, to what trees to replace that are going to be robust to current circumstances rather than and last for the next few hundred years.
Of course, the younger trees that are inside the water meadow have got protection around them so that the deer don't eat them. But we have other issues with deer, don't we, even outside the water meadow? Not just our own here.
There's populations of wild deer around in Oxford. There's muntjac and roe deer. Again, they're wild animals. I think we should feel privileged that they're using our grounds. We've got this wonderful green corridor going through the centre of town. So for planting trees, it's a question of protecting them adequately so that they can survive until they're big enough that they can cope with, you know, a few lower branches being browsed by the deer. So we're going to head over to the Fellows Garden now, crossing the bridge over there that goes from Dover Pier across to the other side of the Cherwell. So Dover Pier was one of the main bits that was built up as a fortification during the Civil War. It had a good view over to be able to fire towards any armies, parliamentarian armies that would be arriving on the London Road. I mean, one interesting legacy of that is a lot of the paths are built up with sort of chalky material, and you see quite a few plants growing around on the higher areas there that are more typical of chalk woodlands, really, like butcher's broom, and there's quite a few yew trees as well that you will see in natural chalk woods around this area.
Okay, let's go to the Fellows Garden. So we've walked over the bridge into the Fellows Garden, and as you can see, it's at its absolute height. We've got a mass of blue and white anemones, fritillaries, primroses, and the last of the daffodils still in bloom. The trees just coming into leaf. Absolutely wonderful sight at the moment. So tell us, how have we got fritillaries here? Are these wild, or what are these doing here?
So these ones, you can see they're in a very different kind of place. So we're quite a bit up from the river here. This doesn't flood. So this would be more like if you were growing them at home in your lawn. So the gardeners do collect the seeds sometimes from the population down there and have been spreading them around up here to establish them. And it's quite interesting. You can see they don't need exposure to flooding. They tolerate it because when they're here, they do perfectly well in this garden setting. So the seeds, it's quite a long process growing them from seeds. So in the natural population down there, the seeds were well, up here as well. The seeds germinate sort of between January and March. But the first year or so of their life, then they start forming a bulb, but they just have one sort of leaf that grows. and it's only after 3 years or more that they actually start forming sub-adult plants, so kind of plants that have the leaves like the ones you can see here, but without the flowers. And so it's after 5 to 8 years that they actually start producing the flowers. So they're a very long-lived plant, actually. So it's a strange kind of life cycle, really. So if you are thinking of growing them, it's probably easier to buy bulbs from the garden centre than to try growing them up from seeds. It's quite a long haul to get a flowering plant from a seed.
We've been watching some of the bug life around here, and bumblebees visiting the Fritillaries. Tell us how...
Yes. So yeah, the Fritillaries, they're attracting bees, mainly bumblebees. I think honeybees will visit them as well, and some solitary bees are occasional visitors, but bumblebees seem to be the most effective pollinators. So if we're lucky, we'll be able to see bees travelling around now. So the flower colour is very unusual, of course, and part of their appeal, this sort of checkered pattern. The Latin name is Fritillaria meleagris. So Fritillaria is thought to derive from the Latin for a dice box, so it's kind of referring to a checkerboard pattern. And then meleagris is referring to, is spotted like a guinea fowl. It's the same Latin name for a guinea fowl, actually. So the whole name is kind of, it's a bit like, it's the equivalent of Boaty McBoatface, really. It's like Checky McCheckface.
But it's even more so, because it's a checkerboard, and it's a guinea fowl, and it's a snake's head.
Yes, yes. So I mean, it is an unusual pattern for a flower to have. So probably what the bees see will be a bit different from what we see. I think the white, well, you can see there's two colours of flowers up here, well, possibly three. There's a sort of intermediate pinkish colour, then purple, and then white. So the white coloration is reflecting strongly in ultraviolet, and the bees really see that strongly. So they probably see white dots standing out on a fairly nondescript background to them, but that's the pattern that's attracting them.
And can you tell which plants have been pollinated by looking at them?
I've read that you can. I need to validate this, really, but because the seeds are partly water dispersed, partly wind dispersed, and also during haymaking. So after they've been successfully fertilised, I believe the stem kind of grows a bit extra then, so they kind of shoot up higher above the grass, and they can disperse their seeds that way.
So as well as being a wonderful place for recreation, and we've seen some of the research being done in the water meadow, are there other ways that you use Addisons and the Fellows Garden for research?
I think there's opportunities to use it more, and in fact we're just starting something we're calling the Magdalen Open Air Laboratory to try and get groups of students to learn things about the grounds, but also find out information for us about what lives here, what kind of management that we use around the gardens, how that affects those animals and plants, and whether we can enhance biodiversity on the site. So that's starting very soon. It's an opportunity. If there's anybody who's keen in a particular group of animals or plants and wants to come along and get involved in that, then we'd really welcome alumni, anybody who'd like to get involved. Enhancing biodiversity is a big priority for us over the next few years. Yes. We've got some concrete plans. Yes. We're hoping to introduce some beehives, which will probably be situated somewhere near here, so they can take advantage of this wonderful supply of food. Thank you very much for joining us today on our walk round Addisons and the Fellows Garden. It gives me pleasure every day that I'm here. I run around here in the mornings before breakfast, I walk the dog here, I come here just for quiet contemplation, and it's always a pleasure to see so many students enjoying Addisons Walk as well. And now that we've been able to reopen to the public after the lockdown, it's open to everybody. The college is open from 10 o'clock in the morning every day, so please do come and enjoy Addisons Walk and the Fellows Garden.